Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the forum. My name is Tobias Keller. I'm a trustee at Grace Cathedral and a partner at a law firm here in San Francisco. Today, I'm delighted to welcome our guest, LaDoris Hazzard Cordell, to the forum. A couple things. Feel free to move up. We'll have a little bit of show and tell if your eyes aren't what they once were. Come on up and get a little closer. LaDoris was kind enough to bring some photos and some family pictures that we'll be putting up.
So please come up. There's not many of us, and I'd love it if you come up, particularly because I have some show and tell this morning.
This is
please come up.
Much better already.
Come on up.
While you're getting resettled, just by way of introduction, Judge Cordell was the first African-American woman to sit as a judge for the Superior Court of the County of Santa Clara. Over the course of her nearly 20 years, she has seen different aspects of California's legal system, from behind the bench, where she presided over criminal and civil cases, family court and probate matters, and most every other sort of issue that comes into the California Superior Court. In her book, Her Honor, My Life on the Bench, What Works, What's Broken, and How to Change It, available in the back at the end of the presentation, Judge Cordell provides a rare and thought-provoking combination of memoir and primer of our legal system, perhaps creating the new literary category of the primoir. In Her Honor, Judge Cordell first shares vivid stories of the cases that came through her courtroom, then steps back to put those stories into context, explaining, as her subtitle promises, what works, what's broken, and how to change it. If you have read and enjoyed Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy or Preet Bharara's Doing Justice, you will enjoy Her Honor. And good news, it is just out in paperback, and we have copies in back if you haven't yet purchased your own copy. LaDoris, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much, Tobias. I'm glad to be here and glad to be at the forum at Grace Cathedral.
So there is so much in Your Honor that we have to talk about, more than we have time for today. But before we get to the many issues you address, could you give us a little bit about your background and history? I presume you grew up knowing you wanted to be a judge, right?
Wrong, absolutely wrong. I grew up on the East Coast, just outside of Philadelphia, in a predominantly black community. My parents ran a dry cleaning business, and it was really a segregated kind of upbringing for me. So I'd lived in a black community, but because of where the school district lines were drawn, went to public schools, but they were predominantly white. So I was usually, and my sisters, I'm one of three, I'm in the middle, were usually the only ones of color in our classes, and this was straight through all through high school. The one thing my parents did was made sure that we had it in our heads that we were all going to go to college. The only question was where, and we all did. I eventually ended up at Stanford Law School, and I really got there not because, oh, I always want to be a lawyer, not at all. No one in my family or extended family had ever gone into the law. And basically, when I was in college, I started as a Spanish major, yo puedo hablar español, and I studied at the Universidad de Guanajuato for several months, and then came back and decided, no, I want to go in another direction, and I went into theater and the dramatic arts. And when you think about it, what better preparation, first to be a litigator, which I was, and litigator, it's about persuading a jury, persuading a judge, and when you're in theater, you're trying to persuade an audience to believe whatever it is you're doing on the stage. So that was perfect. I ended up being a litigator, primarily in criminal defense work, and then when I went on the bench, I'm the producer-director, because that's my courtroom. I tell people when they can stand up, sit down, when to speak, not to speak. So it was really a perfect fit when I look back at all of it. But it was not some lifelong dream. What I did know was that I wanted to do something to give back to the community and also to be able to be financially independent. And so it ended up being the law. I did not know in what direction I would go. When I was at Stanford, I was the only African-American woman in my class. And at the time at Stanford, so we're talking the mid-1970s, there were no professors of color and no women at all of any color on the faculty at Stanford. So that was the mid-1970s. So ended up finishing law school. I went into private practice immediately out of law school. I would not recommend this for anyone, but it was really a necessity because I couldn't get a job at any of these major law firms. They were just not hiring black women. And at the time, I have to tell you, I had a really big afro, and it's like, and I wasn't about to compromise, one of those. And so by not compromising, I didn't get a job. So I had to make a way where there seemed to be no way because I had student debt to pay off, and ended up opening up my own practice in East Palo Alto, where there had never before been a lawyer in private practice, and practiced there for about 6.5 years. Stanford then called and said, would you come and be the assistant dean of the law school? Because we need some help. We need some students of color here. I did that, and then the next thing was onto the bench. And I did that work for nearly 20 years.
I'm going to take you to the bench, but as long as I've known you, I haven't asked you.
Which is a long time.
Which is a long time. I've never. Did you grow up? Did you know any lawyers? Did you have any involvement with the legal system, or was it really?
No, I love that question. I don't get asked that hardly at all. No, where I grew up, I did not. I was never in a courtroom, and as I said, no one in my family going into the law, but I didn't even know any lawyers. So it wasn't just in my world at all. However, I went to college at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, and at Antioch, you only are on the campus for 3 months at a time. You have to pack up and leave every other 3 months to go anywhere in the world, just to be a part of the world. And at Antioch, by the way, there are no grades, so you're learning to learn. And so one of my co-ops, what they're called, was on the Mississippi Delta. And that's where I saw my first lawyer, who happened to be a black woman. And to this day, I cannot remember her name. But there were attorneys from the north there in Mississippi trying to get African-American folks registered to vote, which is a really hard thing to do. So that's where I first saw my first lawyer, and it happened to be a black woman.
Interesting. Yeah. We'll make our way to judging. I've got to say, being a practicing lawyer, the idea of getting out of law school and walking into a practice is incredibly intimidating.
It's crazy. It's absurd.
It is indeed. So you must have walked in front of judges and felt very, very small when you first encountered judges as a practicing lawyer.
Right. So what Stanford did for me was to give me the experience of litigating, because they were clinical education, and a lot of law schools have that now, but at the time Stanford was kind of in the forefront, and clinical means practice what you're taught. And so I ended up going into court, into juvenile court, and appearing before juvenile court judges when I was still in law school, so I had a sense of that. But what I didn't expect was that when I actually went into courtrooms, the condescension, the attitudes I got from judges, and I think all of whom were white males that I can remember, and also just from other lawyers who, of course, stereotyped me and made the assumption that I didn't belong up there sitting with the lawyers. And I was told more than once, and this happens to other, particularly black female lawyers, to go sit with the spectators, because this was reserved for lawyers, even though I was a Stanford law grad. So that I didn't expect to encounter, the attitudes, the stereotyping, the condescension. And I remember sitting in court at times, and I practiced mostly in San Mateo County, but I had cases in Marin, San Francisco, San Jose. And I just remember thinking, if I ever had a chance to sit at the bench, I would never treat people the way I am being treated, and watching judges treat defendants, mostly poor people, defendants of color, in such a condescending and disrespectful fashion. But that was the world then. Still the world today for some judges, but much less so.
So your entree into judging, could you explain what pro tem judges were? You talk about in the book.
Sure. Sure. So there's a chapter, the book starts off with a chapter called Bitten by the Judge Bug. And it talks about how I got into judging, because I said this was not some lifelong dream. And I never saw anyone who looked like me, so why would I think I could be a judge? And remember, back then, we're talking the late 70s, early 80s, there weren't all these TV court shows. So today you turn them on, you see judges, black, Latina, all kinds. That was not the case back in the day. So as I write in the first chapter, I get this random phone call, and it's from a judge. I don't know him. He introduced himself, and he was a white guy, a judge in San Jose. And he said, we have in Santa Clara County a judge pro tem program. where you can be a judge, because pro tem from the Latin means for the time. So you can be a judge for a day or for one case over small claims cases. And why small claims? Because no lawyers are involved in small claims court. If you ever watched Judge Judy, no lawyers. It's just people suing each other over generally small amounts of money. And this judge, Mark Thomas, said to me, I am trying to diversify this pro tem list. We have lawyers who want to do this for a day. We don't have women and we don't have people of color. Can I put you on the list? And that's really how this happened. So I said, of course, Judge, put me on the list. And then I forgot about it. A few months later, get a phone call from a court in Sunnyvale. Your name has come up on the list. It's just a rotation. Can you come down on such a certain day and hear a small claims case? I'm like, sure, why not? So the day comes, get in my car, drive to Sunnyvale. And at this time, I'm an assistant dean at Stanford Law School. So I have my law practice going. The law school said, can you come be the assistant dean? All right. I go down, and as I write in the book, I'm given a robe, and I'm shown where the courtroom is. And I walk in the courtroom, and there are the two litigants, because this is a small claims case. It's not a big deal, right? And I look, and the two litigants are two black women. And we kind of looked at each other, and this is Sunnyvale. There aren't any black people in Sunnyvale, right? So I'm like, okay. And so I presided over that case. And when I finished ruling in that case and drove home, I said, this is what I want to do. I want to be a judge. Now, what was the case about? I'm going to just tell you that it was about hair. That's all I'm going to tell you. It's a teaser, and it was all about hair, black women's hair. And I will tell you also, when I drove home, I was thinking, wow, I just made this decision. And the court then was white men. I was thinking, how in the world would one of those judges been able to preside over such a case? They wouldn't even know what to ask, let alone what to even consider, what the issues were. I knew. And that brought home this whole issue of having representational diversity everywhere, not just in the courts, but in our world, but especially at that point on the courts. So that was yet another motivator for me to say, you know what? This is what I want to do.
So first I will say it's a wonderful anecdote, and LaDoris is a wonderful salesperson, so you've got to go buy the book, but it's worth it for that anecdote alone. But I also think it's with a very light touch. It's the first instance in the book where you really get this point, why having some diversity on the bench makes a difference, why different life experiences in this very amusing anecdote makes this much, much more important, broader point that hopefully we'll be talking about in a bit. So you sat on the bench for almost 20 years, and you sat judged over all kinds of cases. Right. And I think it might be interesting to people to know that when we think of judges, we think of either criminal cases, you have to go to prison because you murdered somebody, or civil cases where you didn't fulfill your contract, now pay me money. But the courts actually, the superior court, as opposed to the federal courts, does a whole lot more. Right. And it would be really helpful if you could kind of lay out what we call upon our judges to do.
No, I appreciate that. And one of the reasons I wrote this book is to educate people about our legal system, particularly as the state court judges. And why state court judges versus federal? Because there are many, many more. There are almost 40,000 state trial court judges, and I was a trial court judge. The state courts get about 80 million new cases filed every year. So when you go to court, if it's for traffic, if it's small claims, if it's family court, divorce, if it's adoptions, you will meet, the first people you will meet in the legal system when you come in a courtroom are these trial court judges. And so many of us know so little about what it is trial court judges do. We are what I call the people's judges. We are the ones you're going to first interact with. And by the way, I think you have to like people, be a people person to be a good trial court judge, because that's what we deal with all the time. And I've met some judges who don't like people. And they're horrible. They're just horrible because all the things come up in a courtroom. It's a place of drama that part of it I love so much. So different kinds of cases that I presided over, and not just unique to me, but this is generally in our trial courts around the country. Adoptions, probate, and that's for people fighting over dead people stuff. Let's see, we've got family court, so it's child custody, child support. Juvenile court, where juveniles are charged with crimes. Juvenile, anyone under 18 years of age. Then there's the other part of juvenile court. That one's delinquency court. But then there's dependency court, where children are taken out of homes because they have been abused or neglected, sometimes placed in foster care, sometimes with relatives. There's the mental health court, where judges decide who stays in locked psychiatric units and who does not. And then criminal cases, judges decide on bail, decide on levels of incarceration or whether or not a person gets jail time at all. Let's see, what else? Name changes. So I write about this in the book. Everything I'm mentioning to you now is in the book. So it talks about my own experience in these courts and gives you actual cases with real names, cases over which I provided because they were all public. So name change is another. You have to go to a judge if you want to officially change your name. And judges can approve it or not. So those are most of the kinds of cases that I presided over and that are done in the trial courts all around the country.
Were there any departments that you didn't sit in that you recall that you wish you'd had a chance to preside over?
So I was an all-purpose judge. So I've done every assignment. The only case I ever declined to take were death penalty cases because I do not believe in the death penalty. I don't believe it deters anybody. I don't believe in killing people. And I believe it's disproportionately used against people of color. So, and I was indeed at some point assigned a death penalty case, and I politely declined to the presiding judge. I write about this all in the book, who decides, who makes the assignments. But there were plenty of judges on our courts that loved death penalty cases and loved signing those death warrants. So that was not me. That was about it, though.
So in enjoying her honor and learning about the different assignments that you had, I was amazed by your level of recall. You had details down from over a decade, cases more than a decade ago. How'd that happen?
It didn't happen because I have good memory, I will tell you that. So, and that brings me to what gave me this information to actually put in the book, because it's very detailed about some of these cases. The last 7 or 8 years that I was on the bench, and I don't know what started me doing this, I started writing letters to my parents every Friday. So this is back east, and Friday afternoons. Why? Because if you're a trial court judge, generally you don't have hearings on Friday afternoons because you're getting all the files in to prepare for Monday. So I started writing these, and my parents loved hearing about what I was doing in court because I would talk on the phone with them quite a bit, so I decided to start writing them. And so I wrote about everything that happened that week. I wrote the names of people, the kinds of issues that came up. I wrote about how I felt when I made these decisions. And I did it because these were personal. These were going to my parents. So every Friday for 7 years, 8 years. After I retired, I visited my parents back east. And during the visit, at one point, my mother, who was a very organized person, pulls this box out of our middle room closet, and she said, "What do you want me to do with these?" My mother had saved every one of those letters. And I was stunned. I didn't make copies. And I was like, and these were letters, folks, so these are not.
Legal pads, or?
So, well, I didn't handwrite them. I did type the letters, but I put them in envelopes with a postage stamp. And I'm really saddened that we've gotten away, I think, in our society from letter writing. People love getting letters, except from the IRS, but love getting letters. And we've really gotten away from it because of social media. You know, you just put a little, tweet out something out, and it saddens me because I believe it's a wonderful thing to do. So I'm stunned. She saved all these letters. I boxed them up. I sent them back here. And it took me about 2 or 3 years before I decided to start to read them. And I was shocked by the number of cases I had presided over. I was shocked by the kinds of cases. And it was then I got the idea that maybe these letters might be fodder, possibly for a book. So that's how it really got started. So let me just show my parents. So this part of this talk is show and tell, all right? So these are my parents, and I want to read from you, for you. Can you all, is everybody okay on that?
I'm really good at holding pictures.
Thank you.
When you're reading.
So I'm going to read from you a passage from Bitten by the Judge Bug, where I write about my parents. Louis and Clara Hazzard had worked hard to provide for us and to ensure that my two sisters and I went to college. Their mothers had been the help, domestic workers who toiled for next to nothing, serving wealthy white families who resided in Philadelphia's prestigious mainline suburbs. When my mother, a high school graduate, and my father, a graduate of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College, married in 1943, they had neither an inheritance nor a nest egg to get them started. What they did inherit, though, was a terrific work ethic and a powerful drive to succeed. My parents would come to own a home and operate Spring Cleaners, a dry cleaning business that supported our family for 40 years. I also want you all to know I also did an audio recording of the book. So it took me 16 hours to record it in a little booth at Stanford, and so just know that there's the audio book available too.
Have you figured out who's going to play you in the movie?
Not yet. I wish.
Okay.
Let me hold it here, okay? Great.
So, Your Honor is an interesting book because it takes all these really poignant anecdotes, but it also it steps back. You didn't limit yourself to the anecdotes. It actually talks a lot about the legal system and how it all works. So from time to time you read it and you're thinking, well, this system seems to be working reasonably well. Other times it seems like, well, it's structurally sound, but it needs some good people to make it work, and maybe it's just an issue of execution. And then other points you think, this thing is just fundamentally broken. And to some degree you address that, but how do you feel about the judicial system and the way we apply law?
Okay, so I don't, by the way, I call it a legal system. I don't call it a justice system. I think the justice part is a work in progress. We're not there yet, and that's why we're all hopefully working for that. So just generally about the legal system. This book is not a book complaining about everything, not at all. Things are broken and need to be fixed, yes. But basically, my view, as I write in the book, is that the principles underlying our legal system are the best in the world, the best. The right to a speedy trial, the right to a jury trial, the right against self-incrimination, the right to due process. Those are just some of these wonderful principles. The problem is in the implementation of these principles. So these principles were created by propertied white men, some of whom owned people who looked like me. And they never intended that these wonderful principles apply to women of any color, to poor people, and certainly not to people of color. So our challenge is to do all we can to ensure that these principles, these wonderful legal principles, apply to everyone fairly and justly. So in this book, I point out some of these areas in which these principles do not apply equally and justly to all. And I also note the next to last chapter in the book called The Fix. I'm not just a complainer. I have picked out 10 things that all of us can do to try to fix this, to make the system more fair and just.
So is it fair to say that your judicial philosophy is not to try and figure out what the white men who drafted the Constitution were thinking in 1787?
So the originalist kind of thing. I have a problem with that because what they were thinking and what they cared about were not for women and certainly not for people of color. So if you go back and say, oh, I'm going to adopt this originalist thinking, then you have to adopt the originalist thinking of very sexist and wealthy white men. And that's not going to benefit any of us. So no, I'm not of that ilk. The legal system continues to evolve as we as humans have evolved, and the system must adapt if it's going to be fair and just.
Right. You talk about a number of different things in the book, and I'd like to actually talk about some of the topics because they're so interesting. The first one is, as you go to pains to distinguish the federal system from the state system, one of the important principles in the U.S. Constitution is that federal judges have life tenure. In California, they don't, and it looks like you actually did some research about what is done in other states, but we don't have life tenure, so how do judges get appointed, and what are the implications?
Yeah. So it's important, and thank you for raising this, to distinguish the federal system from state systems. The federal systems, judges are appointed, usually nominated by senators, and with regard to Supreme Court, nominated by the president, and then they serve for a lifetime. I have a real problem with that. I think there should be term limits. So state court, there are term limits. There are no positions in any state courts in this country, as I write in the book, that have lifetime tenure. So judges either come up for election, re-election, or retention. So if you look on the California ballot, the one you're just getting now, you're going to see some Supreme Court justices, California Supreme Court justices, who are up for their terms of 12 years or up. Trial court judges in California and in most of the states have a tenure of 6 years. So every 6 years, your term is up. If you want to stay on the court and continue to be a judge, then you stay on. And then someone, however, can challenge you. A lawyer who has had at least 10 years of practice of law, so Tobias, you could challenge a sitting judge if the seat were to come up for re-election and try to take that person's seat. Or in the appellate courts, there's no elections, meaning someone can't run for the Supreme Court. It's a retention election where you will be asked on the ballot, should this person be retained for another term, which would be 12 years. So there are state Supreme Court justices on the California ballot, as well as some appellate court judges, so they're just below the Supreme Court. So the ultimate court of review is the Supreme Court in California. Then next are the appellate courts, and then next are the trial courts. My book is about the trial courts. So judges can become judges either by being appointed, as I was in 1982, by then Governor Jerry Brown, or judges can run for election if there is a seat open or if a term is up for a particular judge, which I did do 6 years later when I ran for a seat in 1988. I have a chapter in the book called Judges for Sale. And I call it that because even though I won, I do not approve of judicial elections for a number of reasons, two of which, too much money. It's all about money. And there is an impact that a judge has when a judge is running for re-election. It impacts and affects their decision-making. So you want a judge who's just, look at the facts, look at the law, but when they're up for election, it tends to change how they look at cases and how they think because they want to get re-elected. That's a problem, in my view, and I describe what I propose as a fix for that in the book, in the chapter, The Fix.
Well, let's dig in on it a bit more. So they're not partisan elections. We don't have the Republican committee.
Correct. Right.
But you can still contribute. There's advertising.
Yes.
Your positions are put
Yes.
out there. So do judges go out and say, I'm a tough on crime judge. I will put people away for longer than anybody else?
So let me, before I answer that, show you all. This is when I was appointed to the bench. So this is how I got started, right? Jerry Brown, there was a seat open, and Governor Brown at the time was trying to revolutionize our trial courts in California by making them much more diverse than they had ever been. He appointed more women, more people of color, and more LGBTQ people to the bench than any of the governors that preceded him altogether, combined. So let me just show you. This is so after, as I write in the book, when you get appointed or elected, you don't just go to work. You have the ceremony and investiture. It's got to be a big deal. Well, when I was appointed, I was the first black woman judge in all of Northern California. It's 1982. So there was it's called an investiture. and this is where you get sworn in officially and people can come and watch. So this is my investiture, 1982. I want you to note my hairdo then. Okay. 1982, my parents, my then spouse, and my two daughters, who are now in their 40s. And this is just getting ready to be sworn in, okay? And then, I'm gonna set this here. And then you get sworn in. So let me just show you that one. And this is who I asked to swear me in. So here I am taking the oath. And this oath is to uphold all of the laws of the state of California, to abide by the constitutions, plural, of California and the U.S. Constitution. So understand, that's the oath. That's the oath. And this is Felton Henderson. Felton Henderson is a federal judge. He has taken senior status, which means pretty much retired. And he was my mentor. He is my dear, dear friend today. So this is 1982 at Stanford being sworn in. So
I should interrupt and say Felton is a giant among the local bar as well. Everybody knows who Felton is.
Absolutely. And if you don't know him, there's documentary about him, and there's been a biography written about Felton Henderson. But I do write about him in my book and his influence on my life in the legal profession. So then we go to the elected. Your question was about being elected. So I have run for election, and it is, as I write in the book, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, except for a few. So it is campaigning. You have a campaign manager, and you have to ask for money. Now, where do judges get money? They ask lawyers. So lawyers give them money, and some of these lawyers end up appearing in your courtroom, and they've given you money. What is that? No. So they give you money. When I ran, as I note in the book, I raised about $70,000, and this is 1988. So there was an open seat. A judge had retired, and there were two of us running for that seat. One was a white male prosecutor, rather conservative, and then I was running for that seat. And I had been on a lower trial court for about 6.5 years. So understand, back then, there were two levels of trial court: municipal court, superior court. Today, they are consolidated. There's only a superior court. But for me to move up, there was a Republican governor in then, and I was not his cup of tea. That was Duke Majan. So I knew I would have to run in order to get to that seat. So I had to raise money, I had to campaign, lawn signs, mailers, just raise a whole lot of money. Today, that is a pittance, as I write in the book, for judicial campaigns around the country. And could I pull out just real quickly? I don't want to take too much time on this, but I want to just give you an idea about this. So today, outside special interest groups pour money into contested judicial elections, particularly when state Supreme Court seats are at stake. Why those courts? Because the highest of the state courts have the final word on how state laws are interpreted. According to the Brennan Center for Justice, and they're located in New York, 1/3 of all elected justices currently sitting on the bench, this is the state courts now, have run in at least one $1 million race. During the 2015-16 Supreme Court election cycle, political action committees, social welfare organizations, and other non-party groups engaged in a record $27.8 million outside spending spree, making up an unprecedented 40% of overall Supreme Court spending. Unsurprisingly, 56% of that money was contributed by lawyers, lobbyists, and corporate interests. And after the 2010 U.S. Supreme Court decision in Citizens United, it allowed an unlimited flow of money into political campaigns. The floodgates to state judges' campaigns opened as well. So there's the money. But there's a second thing. As I noted, it's about the impact on judicial decision-making. Again, from the book. This is from the Brennan Center for Justice, analyzed 15 years of television advertising data for state Supreme Court elections to gauge the ads' impact on judicial decision-making in criminal cases. 3 key findings. 1, the more frequently ads aired during an election, the less likely State court justices were to rule in favor of criminal defendants. 2, closer to their re-elections, trial judges in Pennsylvania and Washington sentenced defendants convicted of serious felonies to longer sentences than normally imposed for those crimes. So show they're really tough on crime. And 3, trial judges in Alabama imposed death sentences more often in election years, sometimes overriding life sentence verdicts handed down by juries. That is the problem. But I will show you one show and tell. And here I am at my second investiture. And I know it's here. Bear with me one second. And for some reason, I am not seeing it. But I know it's here. Bear with me. And here it is, because it's a lower one. So this is from a newspaper clipping because it was a big deal. I won in a hotly contested election, and I won by more than 20 points, defeating this prosecutor. And I'm being sworn in by the presiding judge, Judge Peter Stone, in the Superior Court. And as you notice, we high-fived. So this is probably the only investiture where judges high-five. Your hands are up for the oath. You might as well just finish it off. So here's the conundrum. I ran for election and won in June 1988 to an empty seat, all right? So this did not happen until January 1989, 6 months later. I won the seat, open seat, in June. Why is it that I could not officially take that seat for 6 months? It's another teaser. It's in the book, Judges for Sale.
And one of the best PR retorts that I've ever seen. I can't believe you're going to deny people that one.
Yes, I am. But it involved the governor, and it's something he and I kind of got into it. You'll read all about it. It's very interesting. And by the way, unprecedented. Never, ever happened to any judge in California, in the whole history of California, what happened to me in trying to get that seat after I won it. Okay. All right. A lot of teasers.
Yep.
All right.
We're going to be going to Q&A shortly, so if you have any questions, please fill out the cards and hand them to Rebecca. As we discussed, we don't have nearly enough time to get through half of the agenda, but I do, on this question of judicial independence, I do want to point out that Judge Cordell really put her money where her mouth was in this, what was known as the Stanford swimmer case down in Santa Clara. Somewhat counterintuitively to a lot of people who think that this was a white male judge who was being soft on a privileged person. Somewhat surprisingly to a lot of people, Judge Cordell was the most prominent person fighting his recall, that is, to keep him in his place, keep him on the bench, and unfortunately was not successful. Another chapter to look at in the book, but it's a powerful story, particularly when you consider that it was LaDoris who was one of the few people who was willing to stand up for the principle of judicial independence, and I salute you for doing that.
And I appreciate that. The chapter in the book is called J'accuse Judges Under Attack. And again, it's focused on the judge, Aaron Persky, who was recalled, and why I stood up to speak on his behalf to fight for judicial independence. So there's a discussion about what that means, why I did it, because he couldn't speak, the rules for judges where you can't speak out on cases that are still pending. And so I was retired, I was able to do that. So I write about it in the book. I also write in that chapter about how I came under attack when I was on the bench and how much of a toll it took, because most people don't realize when you are a public figure, as judges are, you live in a fishbowl. And if there's a litigant who doesn't like what you have done and decides to go rogue, they can make your life miserable. So I write about all that because I really want to give you a sense about the good things, the hard things there are in being a trial court judge in this country.
Well, since you bring up your rub with the judicial discipline system, that had something to do with your supporting a charity, right?
Yes, right. So there's a chapter in the book called Bad Judges, and I write about some bad actors around the country in black robes. And I also write, because if you're going to write a memoir, you've got to be honest, tell the truth, how I was deemed to be a bad judge. And a complaint was filed against me by fellow judges for some cartoons that I drew. So I do artwork, and if you go to my website, you can see some of my artwork. Some of it's cartooning, some of it's serious portrait work. And believe it or not, if you're a judge presiding over cases, sometimes it gets boring. It may shock you. But after case of drunk driving cases, you get a little bored. So I doodled a lot. And then I thought, and I got an idea. I decided to draw some legal cartoons where you have to try to guess what the legal term is, common legal terms, and I donated them to a nonprofit that represents kids. And they put these cartoons into calendars and sold them and raised over $12,000 in 3 months. So the first set of cartoons I did in 1998. So then it was so well received. I did another set of legal cartoons in 1999, and that's when I got in trouble. So again, a teaser. It's in the chapter called Bad Judges, but I do want to show you the cartoons because there's no photographs or cartoons. So I'm just going to give you an idea. Okay. So again, this is the cover of the calendar. So again, you just try to guess, and this was also a separate cartoon inside the calendar. So you want to try to guess. So what do you see? So there's a bench, and you see the robe. So it's a judge.
Since we're shilling,
Yeah.
Who was the calendar benefiting? The proceeds?
Yes, it was legal advocates for children and youth. So they get lawyers to represent kids. All right. So legal term. I'm going to give you this one. It's called hanging judge, right? Because he's hanging over the bench. It's just concrete, right? Now, what got me in trouble on this one? Believe it or not, I put the judge in golf shoes. Okay? All right, so just hold that, all right? So that got me a complaint, all right? So here is this one really irked some judges. So the legal term, again, think of the legal term. So this is a judge, and he's smiling, and he's holding in one hand a bottle of Johnny Walker Red. Okay? All right. So it's a legal term. So I'm going to give you this one. Oh, by the way, in the back is a calendar. This is in the judge's chambers. And every day of the week it says golf. And then there's a line at the bottom here. It says retirement. And then it says more golf afterwards. All right. So here's the legal term. Take the fifth. Come on. He's holding a fifth. Take the fifth.
Come
on. So you get the idea. All right. Take the fifth. All right. So let me give you a couple more real fast. This one, I know you all will get this one. If you think this is Newt Gingrich, it is. All right. So what is he looking at? Come on. Cross. So what's a legal term? Cross-examination. Thank you. Cross-examination. He's examining the cross. Got it? Okay. And one more. This is a little trickier, but let's see if you can get it, because I even put myself in this one. Okay, and I got complained about this one too. So you can see me at the bench, that's me, and people are just doing weird things with their arms and their hands. See that? All right, I'm going to give this one, make a motion. Yeah, okay, got it. So yes, so what happened, this is it. So, this is satire, this is caricature. I was complained about, I had to actually lawyer up to defend myself in my cartoons. And a teaser, you'll read what happened to me. It is not what you think. In the chapter called Bad Judges.
That's great. So a major theme of the book, if you're reading it, that you come out with, is how important it is to have good people on the bench, because these are hard cases, and we want people like Judge Cordell on the bench. But there is a counterweight in the law where legislatures and voters don't always trust judges and will act to limit the judge's discretion in taking action. And you wrote about that most poignantly in discussing the three strikes legislation here in California. If you could talk a little about how that actually operated, and then what it's like to be in the position to be the judge who's forced to deliver some of these sentences.
Yeah. So I showed you my investiture where I had my hand up to take the oath, and it was to enforce all of the laws of the state of California, not the ones that I liked, but even the ones that I disagreed with. You have to. If you don't do that, you need to leave, because that's it. I had a very big issue, and still do today, with the three strikes law. And at one point, California had the harshest three-strike law. It was in other states, not all of them, but of the harshest was here in California. And I had a problem with it. One, because these three-strike laws are called mandatory minimum sentencings. It's where you have no discretion as a judge. So discretion is usually utilized in sentencing. So I try to do what is right. I have the victims, I've got this perpetrator, I've got the community good, and I have to weigh all these things.
Much of the book is dedicated to that in specific cases.
Exactly. So I have to weigh all this. But when you have mandatory minimum laws, there's no discretion. It just says, if this person is convicted of this crime, they've been charged under the three strikes law, and prosecutors do the charging, you must give them a life sentence. Doesn't matter who they are, doesn't matter their background, doesn't matter what provoked, this is what you have to do. So I have a real problem, first of all, with just taking it away from us. It makes the life of a judge very easy. Just sentence them to life, because that's what the law says. And I think that's wrong, and I think every person is different when they come into the system. But there's even something deeper. Here I am, a woman of color, a black woman on the bench, having to enforce laws that disproportionately impact people who look like me. So there was always this conflict. I had all this power, but then I have this ethics, this moral imperatives, the ethics of doing something that it's just, I know is not right, but at the same time, these are the laws, and I took a vow to uphold them. So if I could, I have just a couple of short passages that I want to read to you where I write about this conflict, this problem I have in trying to navigate all of this. So here's the first one. My tenure on the criminal court bench was a conflicted one. By simply donning my robe, I knew that I lent legitimacy to a system that disproportionately targeted people of color. The majority of cases over which I presided involved defendants who looked like me. My presence on the bench gave defendants of color hope that they would be seen not as a bunch of gangbangers, thugs, and drug addicts, but as human beings. And it would allow for the possibility that many, perhaps most, were better than the worst crimes they had ever committed. One of my life's sad recognitions is that it is far easier to understand the humanity of even the most egregious of offenders when that person resembles you. Less so when she does not. Another passage I want to read to you, and this is on the three strikes law. I'm going to try to shorten this a little bit. So I'll just read this. You'll read it in a chapter called Parsing Sentences. So I'm just going to read this last one. As the number of third strike defendants grew, so did my frustration. Here was I, a black woman at the helm of our legal system, with no choice but to enforce a law that I knew was inflicting far more harm than good. I was a participant, albeit a reluctant one, in creating what had become the mass incarceration of people of color. And then this final comment. Race has always been the elephant in the courtroom. With the murder of George Floyd in May 2020 and the dramatic rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, racial disparities, long apparent in criminal prosecutions, sentencings, and incarcerations across the country, are finally front and center in the public discourse. The elephant has exited the courtroom and entered the world stage, giving to judges not only permission, but also the obligation to call out the legal system's failings.
And then you had to give the sentence.
Yes, I did. And in fact, I write in the book where I couldn't do it anymore. And that's when you'll get to the last chapter. It's called In My End is My Beginning. I couldn't do it anymore. I write about the sentencing. I gave a life sentence to Leo Hill, a black man. I did not want to give that sentence. But the law didn't permit me to not do it. And after I did it, I knew I was done. I knew I was done. He was not the first person I had sentenced to life, but when I got to that point, I couldn't do it. I'm not a quitter, so I want you to understand. You'll read in that last chapter, I didn't quit. I retired from the bench, but that did not stop me from continuing to try to make the system better.
We're going to get to the questions. I would again commend the book because before you get to that, one of the very poignant chapters talks about the problem of doing plea bargaining when you've got a prosecutor who says, I've got a 3 strikes mandate in my pocket. You know, even if you didn't do it, you may be well served to plead to a lesser crime.
Yeah.
A couple questions. So what is the most memorable, what is one of the most memorable cases you've presided over? And did you write about it?
I'm sure I did, because I wrote about a bunch of them. There are so many memorable cases in the book, and I'm just not going to pull out one of them. I've given you some idea. In every single, actually, I'll tell you one. In the name change chapter, it's called The Name Game. There is a letter I included in the book, and it's the last page of that chapter. I did name changes, right? You come in, you want your name changed. The only issue I have to consider when you're a judge is if you're not changing your name to commit a fraud. So you can change your name to whatever you want. So I write about, it's actually a kind of funny, entertaining chapter. But the last entry in that chapter is a letter I received the day after I did a name change for a trans woman. And think about this was in the 1990s. A trans woman today, people, you can go in, it's not a deal. Back then, it took courage to be a trans person. And so I got a letter back from this person after I had permitted her to change her name. So you'll read about what happened in that case and what they said in the letter. A little note, my editor told me, and the editor is Macmillan, told me, you can't include the letter without the writer's permission. I hadn't seen this person for 40 years, and she was only in my courtroom for 10 minutes. And I said, well, isn't it my letter? No. In the literary world, you cannot include a letter unless you get permission. You can, however, include the letter, but only 10% of it without a permission. Well, I needed the whole letter. So we set about, and I say we, Florence, my partner in the back, and you'll read about Florence in the book, set about to find this woman from 40 years ago. We found her. And she subsequently agreed, as long as we didn't use her last name, to have her letter in the book. And then she showed up at a book event, and I signed the book that I gave her a book as a gift. So you'll read the letter, and it's very touching and made me feel good about what I was doing on the bench. Because some days I had some really bad days, as you'll read about in the book as well.
Here's a wonderful question that I look forward to hearing your answer on. It says, my question's about bravery. What about your upbringing or makeup made you so able and willing to be the first or the only judge to do what you did? What helped you to be brave enough to take on the unpopular?
So I think being a trial judge means you have to be brave if you're really going to do the work. So some people take this job to retire because, hey, I've done all this all my life, I'm going to kick back. And no, this work is so important. So it's certainly my parents, who were community activists. And the other is just knowing that there were people in my family, my maternal great-grandmother and great-great-grandmother were the enslaved. And I actually have a photo of my great-grandmother. She was freed when she attained the age of 12. So there are these folks who survived what? Middle Passage, came over, had other children, and then were the enslaved, and then survived that. So it's like, how can I not do this work and be brave? Because that was bravery, just surviving all that, being owned by somebody. So that's really it. So for me, it's an easy call. I do write where I got lots of blowback, where I tried to make changes when I was on the bench to make things better. Sometimes I succeeded and sometimes I did not, but that's part of, I think, the work that should be done. I was an activist judge in the most positive sense of the word, meaning I respect judicial precedent, I respect the rule of law, and I also say every minute of our time as a judge should be spent trying to make the system better. And what did I learn? Systems resist change. Whoa, did I get pushed back? People don't want to change, systems don't want to change. And I mean educational systems, legal systems, business systems, even church systems push back against change. So I learned a lot, and but I'm in favor of that kind of activism, not the activism from the rogues that are on the U.S. Supreme Court, 6 of them. I call them rogues because they are outliers, and they are not following judicial precedent, which terrifies me, by the way. Can we talk about my hair for a second?
Let's talk about your hair.
Can I talk about my hair just for a second? All right. Time for a show.
It's a good way to close us out.
All right, here we go. Real fast. So I want you all to see this. So this is me through the nearly 20 years on the bench. And I show you this, and this was 1988 when I first started, the long flowing locks. 1988, I ran for Superior Court and was elected. The hair's getting shorter, a little gray. And then I could do what I wanted. So I have little short dreads. I cut it short, then I had a box, see that, the fade, and shorter hair. So why? Why is this important? Hair is a theme that runs through the book. Black women's hair. I wore my hair like this because I could. Because black women, we can do all kinds of things with our hair, right? Okay. In addition, I wore my hair like this to bust stereotypes, to say, judges can look like this. Get over it. Understand. So it's about busting stereotypes. 2020, the governor signed the Crown Act in response to discrimination against people for wearing their hair in the workplace, for wearing the hair in the way they choose, primarily against black women. So in a way, I was prescient, right? This is way ahead of time, saying, no, we have every right to look as we want to look. And I'm going to also tell you, in the book, on the jacket or on the paperback in the back, there are always, this is standard in the book industry, credits for the photographer who did the photo and also for the design of the book jacket. My editor, I said, I want one more credit on the book. And I said, I want it from my hairstylist, Rabia. And what did my editor say? No, that you can't do that. Because in the book world, you never give a credit for hair. In magazines, you can. And I said to her, well, who made that rule? What? This book is the first book ever published in the world that has a credit for the hairstylist. And that's for Rabia. And I'm going to just show you what who Rabia is, because I think it's important, because it's a part of... So on the left, this is Rabia, who has done my hair since 1980. I don't know. That's Rabia. And here, I talk about in the book Benita, my bailiff, and Olga, my courtroom clerk. This was a black and brown lady courtroom, just so you understand, all right? So this was my bailiff, my clerk, and this was Rabia, who was responsible for giving me all those different hairstyles that I wore all through the years. And I think we have time maybe to close out about...
You want to talk about Kelly?
Yeah.
All right,
Can we
got to do
real
it quick.
fast?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I do it in 3 minutes? It's a show and tell. And I was going to read from the book, but I'm not going to do it. After I left the bench, I wrote an op-ed against the three strikes law, because now I'm unmuzzled. I can say whatever I want to say. You remember the Montel Williams show was a talk show in New York. So Montel reached out and asked me to come on his show. So I went to New York. I brought my mother with me. She was in the audience. And we did a show on the three strikes law. On the program were two black women who were sisters. And they were talking about their sister, their younger sister, Kelly Turner, who was incarcerated for life under the three strikes law in California. Her third strike, she tried to pass a stolen check at Nordstrom's for $144. She's serving life. So when I heard about Kelly, she was in her 11th year of a life sentence, and Kelly was in her late 30s. So when I got back here, I decided I just couldn't be at peace. So I drove down to Chowchilla, to the prison. I met Kelly, and I was not a lawyer. I didn't activate my license to practice law, but I knew I just couldn't let this rest. This was crazy, a life sentence for a $144 check. So I ended up working with a volunteer lawyer. His name was Roy, who was a corporate attorney who wanted to do some pro bono work. The two of us worked for 2.5 years. And on September 8th, 2008, because I went to see Kelly in 2006, I went back to a courtroom in LA where Kelly had been sentenced. I hadn't seen Kelly for more than 2 years. She was in the courtroom, and Judge Peter Espinoza presided over the hearing. There was a prosecutor there who decided not to oppose our habeas petition, and Kelly was freed. So I want to show you just 2 quick photos. These two. This is me in Los Angeles, and here's Kelly. She's in handcuffs. They wouldn't take the cuffs off, even though. And this is the DA, the prosecutor. Our legal work was so good, the prosecutor said, oh, I don't think we can actually go do anything to oppose the habeas petition. That's the prosecutor in LA. And then this is Roy, the attorney who volunteered, Roy Bartlett, and there's Kelly again, as you can see. By this time, she'd been 14 years in on a life sentence for a $144 check. Now, understand, she had committed a crime. And she had other strikes. They were theft strikes. So don't get me wrong. This is not where this is somebody exonerated because they were innocent. This is someone who was serving time. But how much time? Really? This was mandatory minimum. She's out. Turns out she's the first woman to ever be freed in California under the 3 strikes law. I didn't know that at the time. And final, this is what freedom looks like after a year. Kelly's in the middle with her sisters. This is what freedom looks like. This is what freedom looks like. This is what activism looks like. And everyone who worked for her freedom did it pro bono, for free. Kelly's doing great. She lives in Central California. She's married. She has a passport, driver's license. She's been to Italy. And she got an award recently from the state probation department for her work with kids. Got it? Yes. There.
I can't think of a better way to end
This one
it.
here.
LaDoris Cordell, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tobias.
Her honor will be available for purchasing back. A few final announcements. Next Sunday at the Forum, Dean Malcolm Clemens Young and Miguel Bustos, are the Senior Director for the Center for Social Justice at Glide, will be talking with workers and civil rights hero and feminist icon Dolores Huerta. You're very welcome to attend the 11 o'clock Choral Eucharist service upstairs in the Cathedral. We do rely on your support for the Forum. Gifts of any size make a difference. You can give online at gracecathedral.org or by texting THINK, T-H-I-N-K, to 76278. Thank you again to Judge LaDoris Hazzard Cordell, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you all so much.